I've spoken before on the subject of language and how it's manipulated in a truly Orwellian way, so that the meanings of words, as we the 99% understand them anyway, are completely inverted when used by the 1% to mean something very different. One of the very best examples of this is the word democracy. For there can't be many words in everyday use whose defined meaning is so very different from daily reality. The United States government is the self-appointed global policeman of democracy. When I last checked the State Department website, the first sentence of the section on democracy and human rights reads as follows: "Promoting freedom and democracy and protecting human rights around the world are central to US foreign policy." If it wasn't so deadly serious, that statement would be laugh out loud funny. But it is instead jaw-droppingly cynical. Although the whole sentence could and should be thoroughly dissected for the outrageous lie it is, in this talk I'll be focusing on just one of the words used, democracy, concentrating especially on how it's misused here in the UK. As Britain is one of the most influential supporters of the US government, it's obviously complicit in perpetuating the lie. Not that this presents Her Majesty's government with any difficulties, for one obvious reason implicit in that very common expression that I've just used. Her Majesty's government, not the people who pay for its government, but Her Majesty's government. As I'll try to prove very soon, real democracy does not exist in Britain. Democracy has never existed in Britain, and if our trusted rulers, the Majesties and the other 1%ers, continue to have their way, it never will exist in Britain. The vast majority of people who vote in elections sincerely believe they have some sort of ultimate control over the actions of their leaders. Otherwise, why do they do it? Why bother to vote? Even though most voters would accept that control is exceedingly difficult to exercise, they nevertheless believe that if they really wanted to, they could control their government. They are wrong. They cannot. Ask the million-plus people who marched through the streets of London in an attempt to prevent Blair's illegal adventure in Iraq. Democracy in Britain is no more than a cynical illusion, deliberately fabricated to fool the people into believing that their opinions matter. Except for the use in the marketing of pre-arranged plans of the 1%, the opinions of the people simply do not matter, and they never have. This fact is arguably the most important to grasp, because until people do grasp it, they will be unable to motivate themselves to change this situation. It's the purpose of this talk to show some of the proof for this most important fact. The new shorter Oxford English Dictionary defines the word democracy as follows. If I can find it. Democracy is government by the people, a form of government in which the power resides in the people and is exercised by them either directly or by means of elected representatives, a form of society which favours equal rights, the ignoring of hereditary class distinctions, and tolerance of minority views. Now let's just examine that definition a little more closely. Consider the very first phrase, government by the people. This is perhaps the most significant part of the whole definition, as it establishes in the mind of the reader the central principle of democracy, a notion that ordinary people have some sort of direct political decision-making authority. The next few words proceed to reinforce that notion, in which the power of government resides in the people and is exercised by them. That's pretty clear, isn't it? It suggests we the people directly control our government. Now there's no nation on earth where this is in fact the case, although Switzerland at least tries a little harder than most. The closest the rest of us ever come in our so-called democratic countries to exercising power is that once every few years we have the chance to scratch a mark by the side of some complete stranger's name, and that's it. That's our only fleeting involvement in the actual decision-making of the governments we pay for. That key word, people, appears twice in our definition, but the meaning of even that word is not quite as obvious as it may seem. Although I've mentioned this particular point in a previous talk on the subject of proper information, it's worth mentioning again. To you and me, the word people simply means a number of human beings, but to the 1%, it's very different, and like almost everything else the 1% does, not in a good way. In the United States, the following description is used as the official definition of the word people. And I quote, "Any branch, partnership, associated group, association, estate, trust, corporation, or any other organization, whether or not organized under the laws of any state or any government entity." Now, why do you suppose that might be? Why would the 1% want non-living things like estates, trusts, and corporations to be called people? Could it be because in the United States, the self-styled global role model of democracy, elections are almost entirely funded by big corporations of one kind or another? In other so-called democracies, such as ours for example, the same sort of thing happens too. So when we talk about government by the people, which people do you suppose matter more to the politicians of these countries? The ordinary human beings who vote for them, or the powerful corporations who pay for their election expenses? The next bit from our definition of the word democracy suggests we can exercise the power we supposedly have by means of elected representatives. Whilst it's true that we do indeed elect MPs and local councillors, the actual duties performed by them, and particularly the decisions they make, are entirely out of the control and influence of we the people, the 99%, the living human beings who elect these representatives. Furthermore, the choice of representative we get to vote for is mostly very carefully controlled, so that usually the only real choice we actually get is between individuals who have been carefully selected by wealthy political parties and their corporate sponsors. However, the actual identity of those we elect is in fact irrelevant. We might as well vote for a cardboard cutout or a sack of potatoes for all the difference it makes, because real decision-making power is vested in the hands of tiny minorities of very powerful people. Parliament and the council chambers all around the country are merely the theatres where the pretence of democracy is performed, where illusory debates are enacted prior to predetermined decisions officially taking place and being made public. Now consider the last part of our dictionary definition of the word democracy, the ignoring of hereditary class distinctions. If it wasn't so serious, this would simply be hilarious, because few places provide a finer example of the very opposite of this than right here in Britain, the very home of the good old Oxford English Dictionary, which kindly provided us with our definition of the word democracy. The proof is, of course, blindingly obvious. The highest political appointment in the land, our very head of state, is appointed by hereditary right. And every one of us all around the nation is routinely and regularly brainwashed into accepting that this should be so. And many of the occupants of half of our Parliament, the House of Lords, are similarly appointed, and not one of these 760 Lords is chosen by the electorate. So it's clear that the ordinary voter has as much influence on the considerable decision-making power of all these powerful unelected people as they have influence on the Earth's orbit around the Sun. Therefore, because there are very few moments in our lives when we are truly entrusted with making some sort of political decision, the pitiful choice we're allowed to make every few years of who will supposedly represent our interests in Parliament, when a molecule of political power very briefly resides in the people and is exercised by them, and because hereditary class distinctions are obviously not ignored in our model of government, it's quite impossible to see how the British government can claim to be the champions of democracy, as defined by the nation's premier dictionary, and as many of us understand the word.